At dawn, 17 buildings fell silent in Ouagadougou, and the world woke up to a new battlefield, not of tanks or borders, but wires, firewalls, and stolen voices. For 15 years, under the banners of aid and innovation, foreign hands had been quietly reaching deep into the heart of Africa's digital bloodstream. They mapped her minerals. They monitored her ministers. They profiled her people, millions of them. Then one morning, a single command was given. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't send troops into battle. He sent them into data centers. What followed was not a raid. It was a reckoning. Do not blink. This is not just news. This is a fault line in the digital age. Subscribe and walk with us as we uncover what they tried to keep buried. Because this story is not about espionage. It is about sovereignty, not in the past, but in the cloud. If data is power, it has power, then who controls the future? And if Africa's digital chains are broken, what comes next? It began while the city still slept. At precisely 5 a.m., under cover of early light, Captain Ibrahim Traoré issued the order that would make history. By 7 a.m., 17 sites across Ouagadougou, glass-paneled tech hubs, unmarked warehouses, low-key NGOs, were surrounded by security forces. At 8:45 a.m., the final location was secure. No sirens, no warning, just quiet precision. And silence where there had once been surveillance. This was Operation Clearsight. What appeared on the surface to be legitimate organizations, offices bearing logos of agricultural aid, educational outreach, or telecom support, were exposed as facades. Behind the doors, teams uncovered encrypted routers, foreign IP-linked servers, and data vaults containing the personal records of over 2 million citizens. The scale was staggering. Files held names, addresses, biometric scans, and call histories going back 8 years. Cabinet meeting transcripts, military movement memos, maps of gold and manganese reserves marked with GPS accuracy. One site was just 2 blocks from the Ministry of Education. Another posed as a digital agriculture NGO. In truth, they were nodes, each a listening post, embedded across the city. And they were all connected, not just in structure, but in purpose. Technical teams traced outbound data streams to Herzliya and Tel Aviv. Packets of information bypassed national security filters through concealed telecom architecture. Routes designed to dodge detection. What was being stolen wasn't money or equipment. It was memory, identity, the raw code of a nation's sovereignty. Outside, eyewitnesses reported marked black vehicles parked quietly along boulevards. Some saw helicopters hovering over key districts. Videos from residents began circulating online. Troops removing hard drives, giant sealed servers, and tangled cables glowing with signal. By mid-morning, Burkina Faso had done what no West African nation had dared before. Publicly dismantled a foreign surveillance infrastructure embedded under their own soil. It wasn't just the scope of the raids that shocked observers. It was the clarity. This wasn't improvisation. This was strategy. According to Dr. Samuel Kabore, a digital security researcher at the University of Ouagadougou, this was not a symbolic raid. This was the reassertion of control. For too long, information has flowed one way. That era is over. And the message, though unspoken, was unmistakable. Africa will no longer be observed without consent. For years, international development projects had entered the continent bearing promises, connectivity, efficiency, empowerment. But beneath the smiling logos and startup slogans, some brought something else, embedded espionage. And now the cables that had once been invisible had been pulled into the light. The operation was surgical, but the aftershocks were seismic. The question echoing from the markets of Ouagadougou to the halls of Addis Ababa was simple. If this network existed here, where else might it be hiding? Because if 17 sites can be seized in one city, how many more lie dormant across a continent? And if 2 million profiles can be recovered in one morning, what else is still missing? The sun had barely risen when the silence broke. By noon, Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood at the presidential podium, his voice steady, his words sharp as iron. Africa is no longer your laboratory, he declared. We are not your test subjects, and this continent will no longer be your blind spot. The message rang out far beyond Burkina Faso. Within hours, the ripple became a wave. In Bamako, Malian authorities announced the shutdown of 3 telecom firms suspected of rerouting data abroad. In Niamey, officials neutralized a surveillance compound believed to be embedded inside a foreign embassy. In Conakry, the interim government froze all military imports tied to Israeli contractors. In Lomé, Togo suspended all telecom spending pending full investigation. What began as a national security operation had become something else entirely, a continental reflex. For the first time in decades, leaders across West Africa were not calling foreign capitals to request aid. They were calling each other to coordinate retaliation. 6 heads of state, from Mali, Guinea, Niger, Togo, Ghana, and Benin, met behind closed doors in Ouagadougou just 2 days after the raids. No press, no fanfare. At the center of the table, a single folder containing the intercepted files that had set fire to the region's digital conscience. Captain Traore presented a framework, one that would come to be known as the Digital Sovereignty Doctrine. 4 pillars. 1. No foreign telecom investment without full transparency of hardware, software, and data paths. 2. All citizen data must be stored within African territory. No exceptions, no offshore servers. 3. Any undeclared intelligence activity will trigger immediate expulsion and removal of diplomatic cover. And 4. An attack on one nation's digital sovereignty will be treated as an attack on all, demanding a united continental response. The room was tense, then the first voice of agreement, then another, then all. By the summit's end, each leader had signed a joint declaration. Observers would later compare the moment to the Monroe Doctrine, but African and born not of empire but resistance. Public sentiment surged alongside. In Bamako, students filled the streets with banners. Africa is not for sale. In Conakry, mothers marched peacefully with placards. Digital sovereignty is national sovereignty. In Ouagadougou itself, walls bloomed with painted slogans. Our data, our choice. The young didn't just protest, they created. In Accra, a viral song blended Afrobeat with fragments of Traore's speech. In Nairobi, students hosted forums titled Cloud Control, Africa's New Struggle. In Lagos, a graffiti mural showed a chain server being broken open by calloused hands. Across the continent, the anger was not blind rage, it was clarity. It was the sound of people realizing they had been watched too long and heard too little. And amid this storm of reaction, something deeper took root. The idea that digital borders mattered as much as physical ones. That lines of code could be as dangerous as lines of troops. That sovereignty in the 21st century would not be measured by land alone, but by firewalls, storage, and signal integrity. This wasn't just protest. It was a pivot. A generation raised online was now demanding control over the very tools that shaped their lives. And while governments reacted with urgency, civil society demanded permanence. In Bamako, Dr. Amadou Sissoko, a political scientist, summed it up. For the first time, our presidents are not asking for help. They are protecting each other from it. But behind this unprecedented unity, one question loomed. Could this new alliance hold once the foreign pressure began to rise? In the days that followed, the dust of Operation Clearsight settled not onto silence but onto transformation. Burkina Faso moved fast. Within a fortnight, sweeping policies were enacted. All citizen data, biometric, governmental, educational, must now reside on servers physically located within national borders. Foreign tech companies were given 30 days to submit full transparency reports. Any failure to comply would result in immediate contract termination and asset seizure. Some called it radical. Others called it overdue. Internet speeds doubled. Data costs for consumers dropped by nearly half. Cybersecurity breaches fell by 47%. And with the retreat of opaque foreign firms, a new space began to open, one shaped not by extraction, but by ownership. In Accra, a Ghanaian startup launched a cloud storage platform certified under the new sovereignty framework. In Lagos, a fintech firm repatriated its operations from Europe to Nigeria. In Ouagadougou, 3 young engineers founded a cybersecurity cooperative with seed funding from a government grant born of the raids. This wasn't isolation. It was ignition. A digital economy once colonized by foreign code and cables was being rebuilt with African hands. Meanwhile, foreign investors split into 2 camps. European contractors, especially those dependent on secrecy, began withdrawing. Publicly, they cited unworkable conditions. Privately, they feared exposure. But others stepped forward. India pledged to fund data centers in 5 West African nations. Russia offered cybersecurity academies under full African oversight. Chinese firms laid fiber optic cables with contractual guarantees of African ownership. What had begun as an operation of deletion, of servers seized and routers disabled, was becoming an operation of creation. And in the public sphere, the shift was equally seismic. Across campuses in Nairobi, Dakar, Addis Ababa, and Kampala, the phrase digital sovereignty was no longer just technical jargon. It was civic identity. At the University of Karkri, a lecturer described it as the second independence. In Ouagadougou's markets, vendors spoke of it with pride, right alongside land, language, and labor. Our data, one woman has said, is like our soil. You don't give it away. Art echoed politics. Street murals depicted satellites falling like raindrops onto African soil, only to be absorbed, not exploited. Graffiti near the National Library bore the phrase, "No cloud unless it's ours." Radio stations aired weekly debates on the ethics of data ownership. Youth collectives drafted open-source privacy policies. Lawyers began arguing that data extraction without consent was not just unethical, it was theft. But perhaps the most profound shift was emotional. Where once there had been apathy, there was now urgency. Where once there had been resignation, there was now language. Language for betrayal and for reclamation. This was no longer a matter of hard drives and fiber cables. It was a matter of dignity. For Captain Traoré, this became personal. And for those watching, it was undeniable. The events in Ouagadougou are being seen as the cornerstone of the Ibrahim Traoré legacy, a legacy not forged in war, but in code. A legacy that asked a continent to look not backward at borders drawn by empires, but forward at lines of data yet to be secured. Yet amid this momentum, one question refused to fade. If data is the new battlefield, who will be the next to draw the lines? The world did not remain silent for long. 24 hours after the raids, a call was placed from Tel Aviv to Ouagadougou. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, terse and cautious, insisted that Israel's operations in Africa were developmental, not espionage. He warned that Burkina Faso's actions risked destabilizing the region. Captain Ibrahim Traoré replied with clarity, "There is no misunderstanding when you spy on us. That is not development. That is occupation." The line went dead. It was never redialed. What followed was a battle not only of politics, but of narratives. In Paris, newspapers branded Traoré as authoritarian. In London, editorials framed his stance as a threat to stability. In Washington, think tanks labeled the new doctrine radical, an overreaction, a disruption of business norms. But across African streets, the air carried a different word, respect. From Bamako to Nairobi, citizens marched not for subsidies or handouts, but for something far more intangible and more profound, the right to not be watched. The right to not be extracted. The right to be sovereign, even in silence. Media outlets diverged in tone as much as in geography. Western broadcasters tiptoed, emphasizing security risks and economic fallout. Meanwhile, outlets from Africa, Asia, and the global south used another term, revelation. Al Jazeera called it the unveiling of a hidden empire. China's Global Times dubbed it a turning point in technological independence. Russian channels described it as proof of Western hypocrisy, speaking of development, practicing domination. And the counterweight to criticism was tangible. Delegations from China, India, and Russia publicly offered support for the proposed digital sovereignty doctrine. Proposals included building data centers, training African engineers, and installing infrastructure with full local ownership. Some saw opportunity. Others saw a shift in gravity. For the first time in decades, Africa was not asking to join the table. It was setting it. Across African headlines, this shift is called the Ibrahim Traoré Vision 2050, a vision where no bite leaves without consent. But amid this newfound leverage, threats loomed. In Brussels, EU officials warned of sanctions. In Washington, the State Department urged digital cooperation while cautioning against reactionary isolationism. France suspended military training programs. Britain paused diplomatic funding. Still, momentum within the continent surged. A Pan-African poll revealed that 68% of respondents supported the creation of national digital sovereignty laws. Among those under 30, support rose to 82%. Public trust in Western tech firms plummeted. Meanwhile, trust in local providers and leaders who defended them rose sharply. Yet even as Africa found its voice, the pressure mounted. The question remained, could this fragile defiance survive a global system built to silence it? The servers were seized, the networks exposed, the statements delivered. But revolutions do not live in headlines, they live in the days that follow. 6 months after Operation Clearsight, something unusual happened in Burkina Faso. The internet got faster, and cheaper, and safer. Data costs dropped by nearly half. Speeds doubled. Security breaches fell dramatically. Why? Because the country had rewritten its rules and its relationships. Under the new digital sovereignty policies, every byte of citizen data had to remain within national borders. Foreign firms were now required to undergo regular third-party audits. Non-compliance meant immediate contract termination. No appeals, no delays. Some multinationals walked away, but others stepped in with a different posture. India offered to build regional data centers from Dakar to Addis Ababa. Russia proposed cyber academies under African control. Chinese firms laid fiber optic cables, this time under contracts, guaranteeing full African ownership. This was not just policy, it was posture. And that posture echoed across the continent. Nigeria began auditing its foreign-built networks. Morocco passed laws mandating local data hosting. Kenya established a national cloud service run by public-private partnerships. Local startups flourished. Engineers returned from abroad. Young entrepreneurs, once drowned out by foreign giants, now had space and capital to build. In Accra, a company launched the first Pan-African cloud storage platform. In Kigali, a group of students founded a data protection alliance. In Ouagadougou, high school students debated digital ethics as part of civic education. Across the continent, sovereignty had found a new frontier, not just in borders or ballots, but in code. Public opinion shifted too. In markets and on campuses, in cafes and commuter buses, people spoke not only of freedom, but of control. Of who gets to touch their data. Of what independence really means in the age of algorithms. One student in Nairobi put it best. Our independence was won with rifles. Our future will be won with servers. Still, challenges remain. Building infrastructure takes time. Training engineers takes investment. And maintaining oversight demands vigilance. There are risks of overreach, of inefficiency, of external retaliation. But one truth now holds. Africa is no longer invisible in the digital age. And for Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the question is no longer whether sovereignty is possible, but whether it can be sustained. Because revolutions do not end with revelations. They begin with them. But who will carry the fire forward when the cameras turn away? At dawn, 17 buildings fell silent in Ouagadougou. But what began as a morning raid has become something far greater, the birth of a doctrine. Operation Clearsight exposed not only hidden servers and stolen profiles, it exposed the truth that sovereignty in the 21st century is not guarded at borders. It is guarded in bandwidth. Not by armies, but by algorithms. Not by maps of land, but by maps of data. For Captain Ibrahim Traoré, this moment is more than a military operation. It is a statement carved into history. And for Burkina Faso, it is more than a victory. It is a beginning. Across Africa, the echoes grow louder. From Lagos to Nairobi, from Dakar to Addis Ababa, citizens are asking the same question. If one nation can reclaim its data, why not all? If one country can say no to exploitation, why should another remain silent? This is where legacy is born. The Ibrahim Traoré legacy is not measured by speeches or parades. It is measured by servers secured, by citizens protected, by nations empowered to decide their own future. A legacy written not in blood, but in bandwidth. And the horizon is clear. Across debates, headlines, and protests, a vision is emerging. A continent not merely consuming technology, but shaping it. Not begging for access, but demanding control. Not exporting data for free, but valuing it as resource, as dignity, as power. That is the Ibrahim Traoré Vision 2050, a future where Africa is sovereign not only on paper, but in the cloud. Yet the question lingers, but will this doctrine endure or fade into rhetoric under foreign pressure? Will Africa's leaders hold the line, or will economic temptation unravel unity? Will the momentum of the present survive the weight of the future? The answer lies not in the hands of one man, but in the will of millions. And so the story does not end with Ouagadougou. It begins there. If data is destiny, then Africa's future is being written now. In servers, in cables, in choices. If you believe this moment matters, do not let it fade. Subscribe, share, and let the world know. Africa bows to no one.